Welcome back to another video with me, JD. We are doing, for the first time ever, a dual team update. We're going to go through both Supercoach and Fantasy same time. And the reason why is pretty simple. One, there's only 4 differences between these two teams as it currently stands right now, which is just one rookie and then 3 on-field players. I think that's the total differences, which is the first time ever, I believe, that my fantasy and Supercoach teams have been so unique. And what tends to happen is I give Supercoach all the love. I will spend an hour going through the players, updating everything on position, and then I get around to recording a fantasy video, and it's like, just go watch a Supercoach video. It's like the Cliff Notes, right? I don't want to do that. I want to explain both of them side by side, go through why the differences exist as well, because I think it starts to give you an insight for some of the difference between the games. And I know based on the last couple of videos, there's more people that are actually interested in trying both games this year, whether you're someone that played fantasy and is starting Supercoach or vice versa. It seems to be more people that are willing to try both games, which is great. So hopefully going through both at the same time will be useful. And I've also done at least one Supercoach team update video before, so I'll also go through what's changed since that time, which I don't think is that much, to be honest. I feel like I've been ahead of a few of the trends, which it's preseason, you get nothing for that because everyone ends up jumping on the same picks anyway. But hey, we'll take the credit for where we can get it. Okay, so we are actually starting out with a difference in the two sides. There's 4 differences, and it happens to be at D1. So in Supercoach, I have Nick Dacos, and in Fantasy, I have Stewart, which is somewhat interesting because Stewart is definitely more of a favored Supercoach pick. His game style is more suited towards Supercoach. I think he averaged 114 for Supercoach last year, something like 99 for Fantasy. So, oh no, maybe it was lower than that. It was 94, I think, because he had the injury affected game. So, definitely a better Supercoach game than Fantasy. I think Dacos also scored higher in Supercoach than Fantasy, but he's going to score high everywhere. So, I guess talking through both, I like both of these players, and I could reasonably see myself starting Dacos in Fantasy still, and I could still reasonably see myself starting Stewart in Supercoach. So I think they could go either way. It just so happens that with pricing, Dacos is only about 20k more expensive. Actually, it's less than it's 15k more expensive in Supercoach, whereas in Fantasy, he's 120k, something like that, more expensive than Stewart. So big difference in terms of cost there. So Stewart, I think to be a worthwhile pick, needs to average something like low 100s in Fantasy. Definitely break over that 100 barrier. He's priced at 94, as I mentioned. If you remove that injury affected game last year, he would go up to 99 anyway. And it's, easy to remove that injury affected game. Tom Stewart seems to always have them, and his age is definitely at the wrong point now, in his career, but less miles on the body is hopefully useful. I think the reason to pick Stewart is simply that Cats fell off a bit last year, and I could reasonably see them falling off a bit further again this year. More ball down back, which would end up meaning good things for Stewart. No Sava Radaglia that they've got to kind of carry through there either. So yeah, I think he can be a reasonable option this year. Good buy as well, and a lot of the other defenders I see potential regression in. So Sicily, I think probably regresses. Ryan, I think regresses. Sinclair, I think probably regresses. Maybe stays the same. Houston and Newman probably regression candidates as well. Maybe someone like Short can improve under Uze. Who knows? But yeah, a lot of these guys not particularly big on. So for me, it just comes down to like a Stewart and a Dacos. For me, Dacos I think will be D1 this year by a country mile. I don't think that's a particularly out there take. I have a feeling he's going to be top 3, potentially even the top scorer in both formats this year. He's just that good. So what's there to worry about? Firstly, the bye is the big one, and then secondly, in round 4 they play. Oh, sorry, is it round 4? But before they bye, they play the Hawks, where they've been tagged by Finn McGuinness the last 2 times, including that injury game. And then after the bye, they play Port, and in their last game versus Port, Drew tagged him for 3 quarters before moving on to Degoe in Q4. So it's reasonable to believe that Dacos not only has that bye, but gets tagged either side of it and ends up getting much cheaper at exactly that point in the year, which would be perfect if you don't start him. And that is why I think it's reasonable to not start him. With that said, he's priced at 116 in Supercoach, and I think 109 in Fantasy. And I could see him going like 125 and 115, which would yeah, easily put him at the very pointy end of the pile, be a coach option. And I don't think it's unreasonable to see him start out of the gate, at least in SuperCoach format, 130 each week. So based on the back end of last year, he's moving into a full-time mid-role this year. Last year, he had 3 regular season games where he was 70% or more CBAs. And in those games, he averaged 131 Supercoach, and I think it was 121 fantasy. He had a 4th game with over 70%. That was the grand final against the Lions. He went 131 Supercoach in that and 110 fantasy in that. So his stats as a midfielder are actually very good. I think it just comes down to the tag and how much attention he gets this year and whether teams are willing to take him on and see how that goes, which tends to be the case earlier in the season, which means, to me, maybe he's an early season pick. And yeah, he gets tagged a couple of times and people jump on him, but that's also when more teams start tagging him. So I don't know. I like both of these players, but for price reasons, I've got Stewart in fantasy. And I think for the captain, vice captaincy, I want Deos in Supercoach. Moving on, I think in both of my teams have the same defense for the rest of the ride. So Hayden Young has been in all my teams since the start of the year, and he is going to stay there. I believe I don't see any reason why he wouldn't. Yeah, numbers are good when he moved into the midfield. He's been training in the midfield all preseason. The one question mark, maybe that Chapman has gone down with a hamstring injury, looks likely to maybe miss round 1, possibly round 2 as well, something like that, depending on his time frame, given his injury history. Could they look to use Hayden Young in defense now that Chapman's out? I think the answer is no. Just quietly, just like Chapman wasn't there last year, and they still tried Young in the guts last 5-6 games last year. So I don't think it affects him at all. Yeah, like this is just an upside pick. He's discounted for what he can do as a mid. So absolutely love the Young pick. And once again, that great Freo buy. Up next is a controversial one, Elliot Yeo. Might need to bring out the spreadsheet for old Yo in a second. Where would I like to recruit him as a defender? Thank you. All right. So Yo has been training in the guts all preseason, where he's done his best work in the past. And his best work could see him reasonably scoring in the 100s, low 100s up to the 110 range. I think 110 is probably a little bit optimistic with where the Eagles are at the moment, but absolutely has the scoring potential to be a keeper. And what he's priced at is ridiculous. Actually, where have I got Elliot Yeo? So he's priced at 80 in Supercoach and 70 in fantasy, which is very cheap. It is very cheap. So no buy, which is great. And if you're looking to go from someone into day cost, maybe Yo is your stepping stone. I reasonably see him going at 100 in fantasy and maybe 105 in Supercoach. And I don't know if I've got his what he needs to score in fantasy to be worth that. 89. So I mean, I think he clears 89 easily, which makes him a very good pick. Now, the other thing is, and what everyone will be screaming into their monitors is the injury history. And yes, the injury history for Yo is not good, especially the last 2 years. I think, for me, at least in fantasy, this is a very easy fantasy pick for me. For Supercoach, it's harder. But for fantasy, it comes down to how many games does he need to go at, like 100, say, which I think is what he'll probably average. Maybe it's 95. But how many does he need to go at that before he ends up being such a big win of a pick that it doesn't matter that he got injured? So if say he averages 100 for 4 weeks and then gets injured week 5, is that okay? And if the answer is yes, he will have made enough cash and put enough points on the field, and then you trade him to someone good, then you should absolutely start him, because at the moment he's had full preseason uninterrupted. Everyone says he's flying. The roles there's no uncertainty really about role, and his scoring history is great. It's just how long do you think his body can hold up? And if he had a full preseason, which he came back to early, he started that early, went back earlier than everyone else, and started a mini preseason before the preseason, and he's got through all of it unscathed, then I would place the over-under on games he plays before injury is like closer to 10 than 3, for example, which means I think he'll make enough cash to make it a worthwhile pick, even if he doesn't last out the year. And I think the other thing that happens is if he puts up 2 100s, you're going to see people jumping on him anyway, which means you're doing a different trade while they're correcting to Yo. You've got those first couple of weeks of Yo points plus the money. you end up being quite far ahead in that situation. So Yo is a risk return profile I'm more than happy to lock in for fantasy. For Supercoach, it's much more top and go because he's touch and go, not top and go. What's a top and go? So it's more touch and go for Supercoach because at that 450k price point, I mean, all the still the same stuff applies about his preseason. But really, if we're going to see enough cash in out of him, he's got to be a keeper at this price. So what I say, priced at 80. And once again, I think he gets into the 100s pretty easily with that midfield role, which would make him a top six and a keeper. They're thereabouts, right? Like what Sinclair went 107, Houston went 106. These are the tail end now once we've had some of the DPPs filter out. But yeah, I have Yo, reasonably going up around that price, and he's 100k less than some of these options, 150k less than some of these options. So we'll see how the team structures up and what plays out in the preseason. If there's niggles and all that type of stuff, he might get dropped. But for now, Yo is in the side. I think he's somewhat unique as well, which isn't why I'm selecting him. But I've come around to it for Supercoach. On fantasy, I've had him for much longer, but yeah. All right, next up, and as I mentioned, Chapman is gone. I'd already moved him out of both sides before the injury, but just further confirms that he's gone. And instead, the mid-pricer of choice in the defense is Buderick. For those who watched my last Supercoach video, I read out why I was onto Buderick when it came to his draft profile and all that stuff. But the long and the short of it is he's priced very cheap. He hasn't had a full preseason in the last 2 years, which he will or have had for the first time, assuming he gets through this one. So once again, injury-prone player that presents a lot of upside. It's going to be a common theme that I think we see today. And these players can rule themselves out as, preseason injuries happen, which is inevitable that more of those will be picked up over the next month as we start to get into preseason games and practice matches and the intensity kicks up another level. But Connor Buderick has been earmarked to play the Jaden Short role, earmarked for kick-ins, and had some, really nice scoring over the back end of last year, which seemed to be in that preferred role for the last couple of weeks. So this is someone that I see as a mid-pricer who is best 22, can easily outperform his price. Yeah, the buy is not great for Buderick, but I think there's enough upside to make this pick worthwhile. So he's locked in there. Well, not locked in there. I shouldn't say locked. No one's really locked. I'm happy to move on to anyone at this point in the preseason, but he's in there as a mid-pricer I really like that could, get up towards that top echelon and be a game-changing mid-pricer for me. Now, after this, let's just fill outside because this is where we go into the cheap ones. And look, no need to talk about Williams. His preseason's been good. The last stuff I heard about from Vossi was talking really highly about him as well. Team loves him. Seems like he's going to be locked into that halfback role where he's done his best work, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him push up onto the ball at times as well. Not that it matters. Given his potential at his price, more than happy to take on the injury risk. And then Nick Caulfield, another one who has been getting quite good reports from the Dogs. Seems to have, from everything I've heard so far, he seems to be best 22. I think Bukukamas is the one that is the depth position player that is, threatening for his spot. And he's had a good preseason as well, but it sounds like Caulfield's ahead. Once again, extensive injury history, but has got through this preseason fine, which means I'm willing to take it on. And if he gets any of that half-back rebounding type work, which he could definitely do, he's a good user. Very neat kick, and I think they're trying Dale in the forward line, which means it's Caulfield, Richards, and Daniel. Yeah, I could see him kind of being that third halfback that gets used and end up doing really well. I wouldn't be surprised if it was like a 70, 80 type thing in Supercoach, where his price set is crazy. So, yep, love that as an option. For defense, I think the rookie that I've got in both is Dan Curtin as D7. So, yes, he's had knee injury setbacks, which saw him get taken out of my side earlier, but the latest reports that he was playing in just talked about how good he looked. And the comparison I'm making was Dawson, where he's someone that could start as a defender and then transition into the midfield as his career goes on. And I would imagine you're only comparing people to Dawson if they actually share some of those attributes, which was, lovely read of play, ability to intercept mark, good user of the football. And so if he's got those skills and they're going to play him early, then yeah, I think that's a pick that you want to be on top of. All right, and then to round out the side, I have got. I don't think I could give. I think I got Euland. So I'm looking for a cheap D8 at the moment. It was originally Gibcus, but I think Gibcus is more of a Supercoach player than fantasy. Gibcus is in his third year now, I want to say, and went away to have. I want to say it was his hamstrings looked at and worked on. And do some like specialist training around that. So he's come back in good form, and it sounds like he's had a full preseason, which is great. He was an excellent Supercoach rookie for us, Gibcus. He made a fair bit of money with some spike games, then we were able to move on from him. He wasn't actually so good for fantasy. I think he only averaged like 40, which is probably not great, especially at an elevated price. I think I can get that out of Euland to, I'm not sure his best 22 at the moment, and he's probably a sub risk, but if his role is decent, I think can well outperform his price. On Gibcus, I definitely see him as more of a Supercoach pick at the moment because he loves a spoil, and those spoils get some nice Supercoach points, but they don't do much for fantasy. So yeah, like there's two of the differences knocked out, and it's in defense. It's Gibcus and Euland is a difference, which is neither here nor there, and then Deos and Stewart. And I could see myself reasonably, I could see myself moving from Deos to Stewart because of that buy or concerns around tags, especially with what happens in the preseason. So yeah, not very similar. All right, midfielders. Does it get a little bit different in the midfield? I think it does. So there's a bunch of players that are the same, and maybe we should just start with those. So we'll get Butters, we'll get Davies Uniacke, we will get Walsh. I think he's in both. We will get Nick Martin, and if you saw my last video, that won't be a surprise because he was in there all the way back then. We will get Matt Crouch, and we will get McKercher and Sanders, everyone's favorite rookies. So why these guys? Butters, I've been big on all preseason, and like the simple matter is he started slowly last year because of injury, then came home very strong. I can't imagine them going away from that at all. If I'm being honest, with him being basically their lead mid, there is, Horn Francis should command more mid time. You've got Wines that they're saying will play on ball, but I think Butters will be the one. He was so good last year. What was he, tied fourth in the Brownlow? Just nuts. And I think there was a Hinkley article that came out today pumping up his ties as well. Port have the good buy. Look, I can see people going Rosie as a point of difference. I just think he's the one more likely to go forward and sacrifice now as the captain than Butters is. But yeah, I mean, Wine's coming back in is a bit of a concern, and people will ask, why Wines, why Guthrie, why Carl Amon aren't in there as those cheaper options over Martin Crouch. Martin Crouch are just the ones I like the most at the moment, but Wines could definitely be worth it at his price as well. All right, Davies Uniacke, we saw at his, I'm selecting from the wrong one now. Davies Uniacke, when we saw him at his best last year, he was, near untouchable. One of the best scorers, more suited to Supercoach than fantasy, yes, but I still think he's got the upside to make him worthwhile in both formats. We've got Walsh up next. Stop. I'm saving that spot. That's where the last person goes. So yeah, Sam Walsh, I guess, is a tricky one because I think without the buy, almost everyone would start him. But the fact he's not only got the buy but has it early does make it a little bit trickier. So he is, I think, really underpriced for what he can do. Let's just pull out. Let's have a look at what he's priced at. So he's priced at 103 for Supercoach, 95 for fantasy. For fantasy, that means he needs to go at, according to JPow's numbers, 107, which I think he's done before in, I want to say 2 years ago when he actually had a full preseason. He went 109 off the top. Not entirely sure, but I think that's right. Numbers may be off a little bit. Forgive me. So yeah, I can see him going 110 in fantasy and 115 plus in Supercoach this year pretty easily. Having a flying preseason, training the house down, all those cliches, and with the way that the Blues were playing towards the back end of last year, I think it is something that Sam Walsh works well with. I think it suits his game, his strengths, and we'll continue to see him do well as long as he is fit and firing, which is the hope. Um, so Nick Martin, I've been on for a long time. That hasn't changed. He has been training at halfback basically all preseason for Essendon. I think they're going to try and turn him into a Dacos light, more or less, which is don't worry so much about the defending elements of the game, but make sure you're there to be the distributor, to move it quickly, to use decision making and kicking to open the game up and actually bring some offense for Essendon, a team that sorely lacked it last year, going quite slow and overpossessing the ball at times. So I think they've carved out a role for him, which is not only meant to help them for football sense, but is very super coach and very fantasy friendly, and will mean that he should get DPP at round 6 this year rather than round 5. They have changed that rule just because of the buys. They'll wait until that last buy to assign DPP. But yeah, I think he's going to be one of them that gets it. And that will, like at his price, I think he ends up being a top 6 defender in both fantasy and Supercoach, or close enough that you should absolutely start him. So I think he goes over 100 in fantasy, goes over 105 in Supercoach. So yeah, at his price, I'm really happy to take him on. And then Matt Crouch, like we saw him at the end of last year in that role. They signed him to a 2-year extension. By all reports, it's going to be Laird, Crouch, and Dawson that start in that midfield, with a bit of Rochelle and Rankine coming through. That's been what's been reported in the media, what's been observed at training. So no reason to believe that they're going away from that at the moment. And in that role last year, we saw him go 108 in Supercoach. I can't remember. Probably should have researched some of these numbers beforehand. Let's see exactly where it was at. But yeah, like he's priced at 88 Supercoach, 81 fantasy, and in this last stretch here, he went 108 in Supercoach, 98 in fantasy. So I think for his fantasy number, he needs to go at 101, which he's definitely done in the past. Yeah, I could see that happening. So I'm happy to take on Crouch. From memory as well, they have the last buy, I want to say, which is great because those type of players, even if they don't end up being keepers, you can flip them and they will have made you a fair bit of money. But if he ends up being M8 all year for me in both formats, then I'm cool with that too. All right, so what is the difference between the two sides? So currently in fantasy, I have Steele, and in Supercoach, I have Brayshaw. I like Brayshaw in both formats. I've taken him out of fantasy for price reasons, and Steele is very cheap, so happy to have a look at that. I think he's also a better fantasy player than Supercoach. So Steele has had he had a really bad year last year, averaged under 100, which is on the back of another poor year, but he had the AC injury, the collarbone stuff that went on. He had some strapping with his knee at some point, had a whole bunch of injury stuff, and still kind of pushed on and got to that score. I don't see why he wouldn't kind of bounce back to a 110 range if he had a full preseason and was healthy, even though the Saints are playing a more possessive, less stoppage heavy style of play, which is probably what would benefit Steele more. He does get involved with marking and link up play around the ground if he's fit. So I don't think it's necessarily the worst, but it does move away from the tackling side of his game, which is probably a strength. Well, it's not probably, it is a strength. And then on Brayshaw, yeah, he's a similar story to Butters, which is he started slowly last year. He was with a knee, and then once he got fit from that, he came home like a rocket. The concern, of course, with Brayshaw would be twofold, that there's 2 new changes to the midfield this year, which is one, Young coming in there, and then secondly, Fife coming in there. So where do you want to say his knee injury ended? Maybe round 8? That's where it looks like he's back to his best. For Supercoach, he averaged 117 from that point. For Fantasy, it was 114. So priced at 109 and 110, but 118, 114 upside, that would make him a very good pick at what he's priced at. To make it worthwhile in fantasy, according to JPop averages, he'd need to go 114, but that's what he averaged once his knee was kind of better. So yeah, so he definitely has the scoring potential here. It maybe just comes down to whether or not he is used as mid or as CBA heavy as he was last year. And I guess there is some concern that with Fife coming in, with Young coming in, and Sarong probably doing his best work on the inside as well, that he doesn't get that. But yeah, they've got a great buy. He's durable. I think he's the type of player that I'm more likely to start than not in both sides. And he has been in fantasy basically the whole way until I needed to make up some money. And then, yeah, McKercher and Sanders, I've heard nothing but great things about both of these players. And they both sound like they'll start round one and in good roles. So happy to have them on field as well. Bench rookies, I think, have been the same for basically for both of them. So it's definitely Sharp, who looks like he's more and more likely to get a round one gig at Freo on a wing. He's done some good scoring in the past. Mature age rookie, older brother of Harry, I believe. And with Chapman's injury, probably makes it more likely that he gets a wing role than anything else, or he gets a spot in the side than anything else. So Sharp, you got Jai Clark for the Cats, who has, I believe, been doing work in their like ones midfield side in their match sim stuff, but it's always so hard to know with the Cats because they're just tight-lipped on this stuff. And then this last spot is a bit of a whatever at the moment. It's currently got Clay Hall in it, which I'll put in for both. I'll put in the utility here. So I think he's an ex-dog that's training, well, has got picked up by West Coast. Can play a role in their midfield at the moment. Just depends on whether he ends up with a spot. The reports have been good so far, but with Yo, Kelly, Ginby, Hewitt when he comes back as well. They've got a few bodies to go through there. So who knows who actually ends up getting a spot. It's a placeholder. Not that big of a deal. All right, RLine. So in both, we have got the very boring Gorn Grundy combo. We are actually back to this. Now, for those that haven't been playing as long, the only strategy in SuperCoach and Fantasy used to be old set and forget. Didn't like, especially in SuperCoach, and it was Gorn and Grundy for the longest time. And you just should have started these two every year, and not doing that was the mistake. And people were very excited because after last year, with English and Marshall coming out, with Gorn and Grundy, separating, with Cherry being discounted, we thought, oh, there's so much potential for what the ruck lines look like this year. And I think it's all just going to converge back to Gorn and Grundy, especially with the Cherry interrupted preseason. I still like Cherry as an option, to be honest, over these guys. But Gorn and Grundy both present keeper upside, which Cherry doesn't. And that's why I lean their way at the moment. If I need cash, like Gorn to Cherry is one of the ways I've been looking at freeing it up. And the fact that Cherry doesn't have that buy early helps as well. But yeah, as of right now, that keeper upside leans that way. And then, as I've mentioned a number of times before, I'll be looking for a playing R3. There's a lot of talk that Port will go with Sweet over Soldo, which I'm not sure on. Like, to be honest, it doesn't feel like that will end up happening. Like, for some reason, I have a belief that Soldo will get there, but he's had the interrupted preseason with his finger, and Sweet's, basically had first go at it. The other interesting thing is they've been trialing Finlayson in defense, so I don't know if that's trialing Finlayson in defense so they can play Soldo up front and then play Sweet as well, because Port is just a one ruck side. They're not really a two ruck side. They've got enough tools otherwise. So yeah, interesting to keep an eye on that. The other one that could reasonably get in is Toby Conway for the Cats. So 180k in SuperCoach, a little bit more expensive there, but I believe he's cheaper in fantasy, so 316 in fantasy. So funny how the pricing works across the formats. He's cheaper than Sweet in one and more expensive than the other. But he's the other one that could reasonably end up winning the ruck spot over Stanley. Apparently, Conway's had a pretty good preseason. So yeah, he may end up being the R3 instead of Sweets. And if there's no playing R3s, then maybe it just ends up being a loophole. I don't like loopholes. But for nearly 400k, I can't justify starting Sweet in the hope that he gets a game early. In SuperCoach, I may be able to for 160 and just, have that 60k floating there and hope that he gets games early to make money. All right. So we've got, three of the four differences covered now in Stewart, Yuland, and Steele versus Dacos, Gibcus, and Brayshaw. Oh, that's really annoying that it hasn't filtered. All right, there we go. So it comes down to the forwards. Can you guess what is the forward difference before we get there? Let's go. So in both sides, he's been there all preseason, but it is Flanders, and that of course means that we are overlooking McRae, which I'm totally fine with. I think he's priced about fair. And the talks at Harms, like, might even be going past him in the rotations, is weird. Sanders, I think, will get midfield time over him. So, yeah, I don't see how McRae bounces back in midfield time, which means he's probably priced at what he's going to do this year or regress even further. with the hamstring injury as well, I'm happy to go against that for now. So he's out of the side. Flanders, well known by everyone now, but yeah, dominated on the run home last year. Preseason talks continue to talk him up this year. I think even if he gets just, say, 50% CBA time, which is more than what he had last year, he'll end up being more than good enough to be F1, F2, F3, something like that. And in a line where we have very little certainty at the moment, I think he's probably the one sure thing. So I'm happy to start him even with that bye. All right. I currently still have Zach Fisher in fantasy. I don't know. I I think there's like the role is just crazy. We've seen it too long. And yes, he's had the hamstring issue this preseason, but he's going to get back in time, and I think he's going to get the kick-ins. And if Sheasel's being moved out and it's just like Fisher and McKercher back there, Fisher's the one with the experience. Yeah, yep, all right. Yeah, but he may get moved out. I'm still pretty unsure about the forward line. And to be honest, the thing here is I don't want Fife in fantasy, but I do want him in Supercoach, and this is the last difference. So he is priced very differently between the two formats, and I'll maybe bring that up at the moment. Replacing with Fife. What a laugh. So in Supercoach, he's priced at 51. Oh, it's actually not that different. And in fantasy, he's priced at 54. So pretty cheap in both formats. But the thing is, he is a much better Supercoach scorer than he is a fantasy scorer. And that was true even in his Brownlow years as well, where I think he was going something like 120 Supercoach, 100 fantasy. So what do I expect from Fife this year? I expect somewhere between 50 and 60% CBAs. I expect him to get managed. So I don't think time on ground is going to be massive, but I think with that time on ground and that managed CBAs and Frio's game style, he can still pretty reasonably go like 80s to 90s in Supercoach, maybe like mid 70s to low 80s in fantasy. And that, to be honest, that may be worth it in fantasy. It's almost definitely going to be worth it in Supercoach. It's a little bit like, how many weeks of this need to occur before we've hit the break even, where if he gets injured, it doesn't matter anymore. And I can't tell you what that is. I cannot tell you. I haven't sat down and worked it out. But yeah, I think he's worth a punt. Fisher could turn into him, to be perfectly honest. But yeah. And then I think that's the last difference. So filling out the forward line there, it's Billings and Jordan. I know we haven't heard a ton out of Jordan other than some like good preseason training reports. And even Billings, it hasn't been a ton on, but the Demon reports I've read have been really positive about him. I saw someone speculating he wouldn't be best 22. I think he is. I think he will be quite easily getting like a half forward up into wing role. And I think Jordan, as much as he aspired to have more inside mid-time, I think he'll be playing more of a mix of inside and outside. But I mean, I can't tell you how many vest games he had last year, which has him priced at like a 50. I wonder if it's worth just bringing up his. So I think it was something like he started or finished as the sub in like 8 games. It's something ridiculous. We're looking at this time on ground here. So like 24, 33, 35, 25, 22. These ones all here would be subs. That's probably a sub game too. That's 8 games. Yeah, it must be those 8. And he played 17. So nearly half of his games were sub games last year. Which is why he comes in, so cheap. If I just look at non-sub games, let's try and do that quickly. That'll be all these ones. He averaged 69 for Supercoach and very exciting stuff. 67 for fantasy. Oop, clicked on the wrong thing. Now he needs to go, substantially more than that. But I think this is the other part of this. Like he's come in to play a better role here than what he had in Melbourne. So I think he can well outperform this. He only had 26% CBAs in these roles last year, which is wild. It's incredibly low, and 55% time on ground. So I expect that time on ground goes up. I expect the CBAs, maybe they about where they are or what they are. Like, yeah, about that. But he's got a lot of upside still. So obviously, a lot of these picks, we actually get to see the round 1 roles, like Jordan, Flanders, Gorn, even Buderick. So I'm happy to. Oh, Billings another one. I like the fact that we can look at some of these mid prices. It makes it a lot easier. So yeah, Jordan's on the list. The other one in this range that people are looking at quite heavily at the moment is Harms, and I think they've read into some of his comments about the role he'll be playing a little bit too much. So I think he said he wanted to play more inside mid, and then he'll also play a bit half forward like he did at the Dogs. It's kind of an interesting one, right? Like, just talking out loud, does it make sense for Harms to get more inside mid minutes than McRae does? But like, that's effectively what people are asking for or think he will do. And even with those minutes in the past, he hasn't scored particularly well because he did a lot of defensive work, which I could see them asking for at the Dogs too, given that outside of Libba, it's not exactly a strength of their midfield. So yeah, really weird one. Like, I could still see myself ending with him ending up on my side, especially in Supercoach where he's ridiculously cheap. Probably less so in fantasy. But yeah, he's another one that's in consideration. And then who have we got to finish off? Oh, I think Wilson, who hasn't moved from my sides, and then Sean Manor, the mature age rookie. He's actually had some hamstring complaint based on the last report I read, but look, he's a mature age rookie, and if they likely play him from round one, I don't think it really matters too much that he's had that complaint. Just take the upside. So those are the sides. Once again, the differences are quite few for the moment. It's Stewart versus Dacos, Gibkiss versus Euland, Steele versus Brayshaw, and then Fife versus Fisher. And I could see realistically all of those picks changing as the preseason goes on from here. Now, who are the players that I'm considering next after these in each of the lines that I haven't touched on? I guess in defense, if I was forced to pick someone, it's probably Sicily at the moment, but I just can't see it happening. If Buderick comes out in Supercoach, I'm probably just more likely to put in Stewart and keep Dacos. And, same thing in fantasy. I'm probably just more likely to find a way to start Dacos. In the midfield, there's not too many options to be on, beyond the ones that you've seen that I really like. Like, I think the Crows sound like they should regress with Crouch coming in. Not a massive fan. Rosie, I not big on. The Dogs, I think, absolutely regress. I guess there's some interest in Petrarca without Oliver, just because his scoring was so cracked last year, but he's got the bye, and he's a lower CBA role, which scares me off in the same way Goulden does. Merritt, we've seen for a while. He'll end up getting cheap at some point in the year just through tag or whatever it may be. So generally happy to bet against him. Tom Green's the other one I really like, but once again, another early buy, and I'm probably not starting both Walsh and Green. And then when we get down to Parrish, he's had very good reports for Essendon, but he's got terrible injury history. The Gold Coast guys, I'll keep an eye on the preseason, but don't love them as options. So yeah, there's not, to be honest, there's not a lot below this. I guess Dunkley should have a bounce back here, especially without Ashcroft in the side. But another early buy player. That's the problem with early buys. They really do limit our choices, because once you've got one or two of them in, you don't want to keep adding more. It's okay to take a little bit, but not a lot. So yeah, and the only other thing that maybe could really change the structure here is there's a couple of really cheap plays that are starting to get talked about. They could get good roles. So Thompson Dow, 254k at the Tigers, and you've got Matty Roberts, who is 157k. So Dow sounds like he might end up getting a midfield, heavy midfield rotation, and with Presti's body not holding up, he could even be their third highest CBA midfielder, which, I mean, he hasn't scored particularly well in the past, but it's a great role, maybe one that's worth taking on for that price point. And then Roberts sounds like he's been trained at halfback. I don't know who that pushes out for them though, because I assume they're still going with Lloyd, Blakey. They got Campbell as well. Maybe Campbell's more up the ground, especially with them missing a wing, with Dill Stevens going over to North. So yeah, I guess question mark there. But if one of those two became a really good option, that would change the midfield structure, because they could run an extra rookie probably pretty confidently on field, and maybe that's where I take away one of these premiums and put it into that defense spot if someone like a Buderick or a Yo ends up getting injured. In the rucks, I've kind of already shared the sorts. I can't really see myself starting English, Marshall, so it would just be if Cherry appeals to me enough that I might go down there, and then whether we get a playing R3 or not is an open question as well. And the forward line, this is definitely where the most uncertainty comes from, because we're just sweating on these cheaper mid-price guys to find out who was actually going to be worthwhile picking or not. Fisher, Billings, Jordan, Harms, Fife. Those are probably the top 5 at the moment. I guess a little bit of an interest in Lynch. He's not going to play round 0 though. He's just going to start from round 1, which is problematic because we don't actually get to see his fitness. We don't get to see him within the Tiger system, and he doesn't get that price in his price rises. So he's still going to start later on price rises as well. I think that covers off a lot of them. The other one I didn't touch on was Windhager. So in defense, I guess Windhager's the other one I'd consider over like a Buderick at the moment if his role looks good in the preseason. It's probably the other one that's top of mind. Interesting enough, I'm on Lohman. He's had some good stuff talked about him as well, so he might be a forward option. There's a few names popping up now of cheaper guys that sound like they could get roles, but these are the sides. I haven't actually looked too much at like the buy overlaps here because I can see some bad ones with like, double demons here in the forward line is not probably particularly great, but maybe trade out of one of them before that buy. And then I've also got like gone on that buy. I'd have Dacos as well. It's a fair few missing. Definitely hurts your scoring. Buderick pairing up with Flanders, but no GWS, which is the other one. I guess you got the 2 Blues, but I've got no Giants there. What's the last buy that I'm missing? Tigers with someone. No, I can't remember them all. That's all right. So yeah, these are the teams for now. Let me know what you think, what you like, what you don't like. I think the next video I'll probably do is maybe more of a Q&A because I'm starting to see people ask about players that I haven't necessarily got my sides, which means I'm not talking about them a lot. Or it may be that you want me to go into more detail on a specific player or a specific strategy. I'd much rather talk about strategy than individual picks at this point before we've seen any preseason games. But if you do have those questions, hit me up below or in the Discord, and I'll try and compile them into hopefully a pretty interesting Q&A video next time I see you. Peace.